The U.S. presidential election isn't determined by the popular vote nationwide, but by something called the Electoral College. Each state is allocated electors based on how many members of Congress they have. And in all but 2 states, if you win the vote in a state, you get all of that state's Electoral College votes. There are 538 Electoral College votes in total, meaning a candidate needs 270 to win. The outcome in most states is easy to predict based on traditional voting patterns and the latest polls. Adding up the states that consistently vote for Trump, you get to 219 Electoral College votes for the Republican candidate. If you add up states that are more solidly Democratic, that's a total of 226 votes that Kamala Harris can count on. But that leaves 7 states in the toss-up category. These are the states that will likely determine who becomes president. If Harris wins the traditional blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, she would secure the exact 270 votes needed to win. Even if Trump wins all those close contests in the Sun Belt, he would come up just short. But if Trump adds just one of those 3 states, say Pennsylvania, he would come out on top. That is, unless Harris can make up the ground in states like Arizona and Nevada or Georgia. There are several paths for each of the candidates to win the White House, but you can be all but sure that path will take them through the 7 key battlegrounds we'll be watching closely. Okay, for more on each of the candidates past the 270, we're going to bring in some strategists. Brett Bruen is a former Obama White House official, and Matt Terrill is the former chief of staff to Marco Rubio during his 2016 presidential campaign. They're both here with me in Washington. Gentlemen, it's good to see you in the flesh. We appreciate that. We didn't go through the 269 tie scenario, Brett, because of Nebraska and the potential splits there, because we don't want to scare anybody about what might happen. What's your thoughts on where this is, though, right now? Do you think it is this knife's edge still?
I have to say I'm feeling good. I actually don't think we're going to be looking at quite as close a race as some feared. The underlying indications are that Harris is going to win this, and I think she will win it by a few percentage points. Now, there are a number of factors there, but one, and I think viewers in Canada will be well aware, that women are really, really pissed off here. They're pissed off by how Republicans and Donald Trump particularly have tried to exercise more and more control over their body, even things like IVF in states like Alabama. So that is a motivating factor, and it's a motivating factor not just in blue states, but we've seen it work in states like Kansas, Ohio. I think that is going to push a lot of voters to the polls. I think it's something that's not being picked up by pollsters at this point. Pollsters are weighing groups and age groups and gender. I'm not sure they got it right this time, and I think there's going to be a lot of recriminations afterwards.
Well, Matt, that certainly has been the argument that Kamala Harris's campaign has been trying to make, right? Using abortion as sort of the motivating factor for women of all ages, and they seem to think the whisper caucus, as it's been called, of women who may be married to a Republican are talking to each other about voting this way. How do you see the dynamic in the final day?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of issues that matter to voters right now. Certainly abortion is one of them. Former President Trump has said he's not going to sign a national abortion ban. He's said that throughout this entire campaign. But there's other issues that matter as well, and it's the economy. It's inflation. It's border security. If you look at those issues, former President Trump has been leading Vice President Harris on those issues. He has strong approvals on those issues. And I think for a lot of voters right now, this election comes down to those issues. Price of goods, namely on housing, healthcare, food, and fuel. Border security, safety, that's what matters to voters out there right now.
Trump is still way ahead on the border issue. He's got a pretty strong advantage there. But over time, Harris has eaten into the economic advantage. She's still behind him, but has she gotten it to a point where it's at least more competitive, and for people who are cross-pressured on voting on issues, she's put herself in the game there? You're worried on that, or you think he's still okay?
I don't think Republicans are too worried about that. I think they feel as though that's been a pretty steady number. Sure, you've seen polls go up and down. You've seen some of that certainly on these issues. But I think overall, the Trump campaign, I suspect, feels good in these final hours when it comes to the former president's approval on the economy, inflation, border security. And they also feel good about where they're on early voting. Right. Look, traditionally Republicans don't turn out during early voting.
They don't.
They turn out on election day. So I think what the Trump campaign is looking to do tomorrow is see high turnout. I think the higher the turnout in this race actually is the better path, frankly, for former President Trump with respect to winning this race. I think you're seeing strong numbers for Republicans in early voting, but right now it comes down to voter turnout tomorrow as well.
Right.
And historically, Republicans turn out on Election Day.
So Brett, Kamala Harris was able to run on the abortion issue in a way Joe Biden would not have been able to do it. He spoke about the issue as the end of a constitutional consensus and a legal precedent, and she's driven home this deeply personal approach that has galvanized some key cohorts. But on the economic side, that's where her vulnerability has been. Do you think she's done enough there?
You know, it's interesting, though, because my old boss back behind us, Barack Obama, put it really well. Trump wants to institute a 10 to 20% price hike. That's what tariffs are, as our friends in Canada know very well. And
a lot of economic anxiety about that in Canada.
And on top of that, what else is in his economic plan? He wants to give tax breaks to millionaires. That is not going to hit the pocketbooks of middle America. And that's where I think Harris has been chipping away. And I think importantly so. No, we're not going to, win on the economy. We've obviously had a number of tough years. But the fact that she's narrowed that gap and then made it about some of these other issues, not least of which is, the safety, the security of our democracy. We talk about, the border as though it was the only security safety issue out there. When you have a candidate, and let's not forget, 4 years ago, we had a candidate who used violent rhetoric to mobilize a mob to storm the Capitol, and a number of officers lost their lives in that. So we want to talk about the party of law and order. I think Democrats are really trying to drive home you can't trust Trump.
Matt, on the economy, tariffs, a lot of people will look at a tariff, say, look, he's standing up for the country and have an emotional reaction to it. But it's going to make things more expensive inside the United States, right? Like, how does that help people who are worried about the price of things if you make it more expensive to bring things into the United States? Don't they see the contradiction in that policy?
Well, I think what they're seeing is the price of goods and services every day in their life. The problem with inflation for an incumbent, and Vice President Harris is an incumbent in office right now, it's the Biden-Harris administration. The problem, number one thing you don't want is inflation, because the American people see that every single day in their life. They see it when they go to the grocery store. They see it when they go to fill up their car with gas. So look, this issue of inflation is a big issue in this race, and what they see is comparing and contrasting. They see that former President Trump, when he left office, inflation was at 1.2%. Under the Biden-Harris administration, it's been at 20%. So that's a big issue in this race. And look, talk about tariffs, talk about taxes. Here's the reality. I think a lot of Americans are seeing former President Trump try to do some new things. No tax on tips. He's talking about no income tax. He's talking about the corporate tax rate in some respects as well, which have a major impact on what corporations do, i.e. how many jobs do they create in this country or not. So look, there's a big discussion to have here, but look, the discussion is coming to an end. Voters are going to be comparing and contrasting records right now. And on the economy and inflation, I think a lot of voters will say, you know what, I don't agree with former President Trump on everything he says. But on the issues of the economy, inflation, and border security, I agree with him. And that's why I think a lot of voters will be voting for him tomorrow based on those issues.
So I want to ask you about this poll that came out the weekend, Brett, in Iowa. Red state has Harris +3. Ann Selzer, credible pollster in Iowa. I don't know if she's going to win Iowa, Kamala Harris, but the fact that it shows a poll from a pretty reliable polling company shows this. What does that tell us about where this race might be?
She predicted Barack Obama's win despite in 2008 a lot of the political establishment not seeing it. She predicted Donald Trump's surge in 2016. And here's the key thing. Trump has been so off message these last couple of weeks. He's reminded America what they worry about when he's sitting over there in the Oval Office. And Harris, a lot of us were maybe a little bit skeptical when she came back to, democracy is under threat. And yet Trump has played right into her hands. And I think that's why in places like Iowa, you're seeing some of these shifts, because voters who are making up their minds in these last few weeks are seeing the side of Trump that they least like. And I agree. Obviously, there are, pocketbook issues. There's concerns about immigration. I think, Biden and Harris bungled it early on in the administration. But Harris has come out strong saying, I'm a prosecutor. I'm a former attorney general. I'm a senator who governed from the middle, and I'm going to be the kind of leader who's going to bring us together.
Matt, I wonder what you make when you see a poll like that. I mean, it was sort of a thunderbolt to a lot of people, sort of rationalizing why it couldn't be true or why it is true and different things. what do you take from data like that this late in the game?
Yeah, look, you got to respect where pollsters are at. They're going to see some polls up and down. I think in order for that poll to be accurate, which I'm not saying it is or isn't, but in order for it to be accurate, you're going to have tomorrow Vice President Harris have close to 60% turnout on Election Day. What do we know about Democrat voters? They don't turn out typically on Election Day. They do early voting. Yeah. So I think Republicans are going to have a strong early vote day tomorrow. I think former President Trump's going to win Iowa. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the 7 battleground states we've been talking about. And I think the issues that those voters care about are going to be inflation, the economy, and border security. I think there's a lot of issues been discussed in this race, but the core issues driving this race are those issues. And again, there's a unique moment right now for voters. They can compare and contrast records. And they're going to look at the Trump years and say, you know what? May not agree with everything he said or did, but on the issues of the economy, inflation, border security, I agree with him. And at the end of the day, the big question is this. Are voters better off today than they were 4 years ago? That's the number one question I think driving this race. It's a big question for a lot of voters out there.
2020 was a rough year, though, right? That COVID hit, people died at a catastrophic rate.
But what are the big issues we're seeing in the polling? We're talking about polling right now. We are seeing the economy, inflation, border security topping the list, particularly affordability on housing, healthcare, food, and fuel. And if that's what this race is about, then former President Trump is going to have a good night tomorrow night. But look, it's also another question. Is this race about personality or is it about policy? And I think if it's about policy, if it's about the issues, former President Trump's going to have a better night tomorrow night.
I wonder, Brett, what you make of the final week of the campaign and just the way, the closing argument, as everyone sort of calls it, it was pretty consistent on one side, less so on the other. I mean, what do you make of the final 7 days of the campaign, how it kind of went?
Yeah, look, I mean, Harris certainly, after that initial caffeine high from Biden stepping aside, let her in to the race, had, struggled. There was the interview on The View, what would you do differently? I mean, if I could have been in the room counseling her, I would have said, come up with one thing you would do differently. And that was just such a bad answer. But they have found their footing. They had the event last week at the Ellipse, just on the other side of us. I think it was her best speech ever. And I remember back in Oakland when she launched her campaign during the 2020 race. And I'm sitting there saying, it's not quite there yet. When she did it last week, it was there. It was strong. It was on message. And I think she has secured and sealed the deal with that 2% of Americans who were on the fence. I think for the others, quite frankly, Trump has only just fed more and more red meat to his base. He's, come out with more conspiracy theories, more violent rhetoric, and Americans are reminded of what they didn't want. I agree. If he would have stuck to the issues of inflation, to the issues of the border, if he would have just been normal, not weird, he would have won.
So, Matt, on that, there was they kind of knocked themselves off message with their own rally at Madison Square Garden, right? Because they're forced to respond to a bunch of things that weren't necessarily core to the message. What do you think of the way the Trump campaign closed it? The issues you keep talking about of border, immigration, and the economy and affordability, do you think they drove that home enough, or were they distracted by the other controversies?
Look, I think former President Trump does better when he sticks to the issues. When he's talking about the issues you just talked about, talking about his message, have there been some things that, for example, that comedian should have never been there. He should have never been at that event.
But it wasn't just him, right? It was a whole bunch of speakers, right?
Well, I think at the end of the day, though, you're going to see endorsements and surrogates and speakers for both of these candidates. At the end of the day, I got to be honest, I don't think any of these voters are going to put much weight into that. I think they're going to put weight into what these candidates are saying and where are their records. And right now, I honestly think this election is much more about the policies. I think there's a lot of voters, particularly in these battleground states, who are hurting right now. They're feeling the pain of the economy. They're feeling the pain of inflation. They're looking at the latest jobs report that just came out that was not good. And these are not great signs if you're the Harris campaign. But look, at the end of the day, there are a few hours left in this race. If you're the Trump campaign, stay focused on your message, which has got to be the economy, inflation, border security. If he's talking about that, those are better hours left in this campaign. Stay focused on those core messaging points.
Brett, I got 30 seconds left. The phrase you hear from Democrats is nauseously optimistic, which I think is a beautiful way to describe the feeling before a tight election. Do you really think they have made the moves in the last couple of days?
I do, and it was interesting because I took out from my memory box that old Washington Post article, front page article on Obama's win. Yeah. And they had these photos of Americans crying just because they understood how historic it was. I think we're going to see that, whether it's on Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, Friday morning, whenever the votes come in. You know, there is an energy, there's a momentum behind here. I think Harris and her team have managed to capture it. I think America is going to turn the chapter on MAGA.
All right, we'll see. The polls have always underestimated Trump when he's been on the ticket. They've underestimated Democrats when he wasn't. We're going to start finding out tomorrow. We'll get the real numbers. Brett Bruen, Matt Terrill, good to see you in person. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us tonight in Washington.